Look out of any window in almost any town on Earth, and you will see its handiwork. The strip of hard asphalt running past your door, the painted lines, the traffic light blinking in the distance, the wide flat field of parking outside every shop, the garage bolted to the side of the house. We treat all of this as simply the way the world looks, as natural as hills and rivers. But none of it is natural. Every bit of it was built, poured, and paved to serve a single machine. A machine that did something no invention before it had ever done. It did not just change how we live. It physically rebuilt the surface of the planet to suit itself. We flattened hills for it, split cities in half for it, drowned valleys, and paved deserts for it. We invented whole new kinds of places that had never existed in human history, just so this machine would have somewhere to go. The suburb, the shopping mall, the fast food drive-thru, the motel, the 8-lane highway. None of them would exist without it. This is the story of the car, and it is really the story of how one machine took a planet built for the footstep and the hoof and redrew it from the ground up in its own image. But it did not begin with concrete and glory. It began with terror. Picture a warm morning in the summer of 1888 in the German countryside. Along a dirt road between two towns comes a contraption that no one in those villages has ever seen. A strange, spindly carriage with no horse in front of it, rattling and popping and belching smoke and steering itself forward under some invisible power. At the tiller sits a woman with her 2 teenage sons beside her. As this apparition clatters through each village, people run to their windows, freeze in the road, and stare in disbelief. Some cross themselves, certain they are looking at the work of the devil. Horses rear and bolt. Children scream and chase after it. The woman driving is named Bertha Benz, and the machine beneath her is one of the very first automobiles on Earth. She has taken it without telling her inventor husband on the first long road journey any car has ever made, more than 60 miles, to prove to a doubting world that this ridiculous, frightening toy actually works. And in doing so, she becomes the first person in history to see the road the way we all see it now, as something to be conquered by an engine. To understand why that morning was so shocking, you have to understand the world it interrupted. For all of human history up to that point, the fastest a person could travel across land was the speed of a galloping horse, and they had never gone faster. Cities were small and dense, packed tight because everything a person needed had to be within walking distance, or at most a short ride. The blacksmith, the market, the church, the workshop, all crowded together along narrow streets that had grown up over centuries around the pace of the human foot. The horse ruled everything. It pulled the plows, the carriages, the wagons, the fire engines. And it is worth pausing on just how completely the horse ruled, because we have forgotten. A great city of the 1800s held hundreds of thousands of horses, and each one dropped many pounds of manure onto the streets every single day, along with rivers of urine, so that the roads became reeking swamps of filth that bred flies and disease. And the carcasses of horses that dropped dead in harness were often left to rot where they fell. The problem grew so dire that experts of the time genuinely feared their cities would one day be buried under the waste, and one famous prediction warned that within 50 years the streets of London would lie under 9 feet of manure. The clean, quiet, convenient world we imagined before the car never existed. The old world was drowning, quite literally, in the byproducts of the horse. And into that stinking, hoof-beaten world came a machine that needed no stable, no hay, and left no manure at all. And for a long time, the few dreamers who tried to build a self-moving vehicle were met with fear and law. In Britain, Early steam-powered road carriages so alarmed the public that the government passed a famous law requiring that a man walk ahead of every such vehicle, on foot, waving a red flag to warn people to get out of the way. Think about that. The law's answer to a machine that could outrun a horse was to force it to crawl behind a man walking. The world was not ready. The world was terrified, and it had every reason to be, because the thing that was coming would leave almost nothing about that old world standing. The man who truly cracked it was a German engineer named Carl Benz. In the year 1886, he was granted a patent for a vehicle built around a new kind of heart, a small internal combustion engine, burning liquid fuel in bursts to turn a wheel. It was little more than a motorized three-wheeled carriage, slow and fragile and strange. Around the same time, two other Germans, Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach, were fitting their own high-speed engine to a carriage. The automobile was being born in more than one workshop at once, but an invention in a workshop is just a curiosity. It only becomes history when someone proves it can live in the real world. And that is exactly what Bertha Benz did on that summer morning, driving her husband's untested machine over public roads for hours. When the fuel line clogged, she cleaned it with a pin from her hat. When a wire wore through, she insulated it with a garter. When the wooden brakes wore down on the long hills, she stopped at a cobbler and had him nail on leather, inventing on the spot the brake lining. She limped the machine home and handed her husband not just a working car, but proof and a list of every improvement it needed. The automobile had survived its first contact with the world, and yet, for years, it remained a plaything for the rich. Early cars were monstrously expensive, hand-built one at a time by skilled craftsmen, so that only the wealthy could own one. They were loud, unreliable, and dangerous. They frightened horses, choked the air, and broke down constantly, and ordinary people despised them. When a fine motor car sputtered to a halt at the roadside, farmers and pedestrians would jeer the famous taunt of the age, "Get a horse." To most people at the turn of the century, the automobile looked like exactly what it was, an arrogant, costly, noisy toy for the few, with no place in the life of the common man. If the car had stayed that way, it would have changed nothing. A machine that only the rich can own can never remake a world. For the automobile to rebuild the planet, it first had to escape the mansion and reach the millions. And the man who made that happen did not invent the car at all. He invented something far more powerful, a way to build it for everyone. That man was Henry Ford. Ford did not care to build a beautiful car for the wealthy. He wanted to build a plain, tough, affordable car for the ordinary family, the farmer, the clerk, the worker. In 1908, he introduced it, the Model T. Simple, rugged, and easy to fix. It was a good car. But the true revolution was not the car. It was how he chose to make it. For all of history, complex goods had been built by craftsmen who moved around a workshop, assembling one item slowly from start to finish. Ford turned that idea inside out. In 1913, he perfected the moving assembly line. Instead of the workers moving to the car moved past the workers on a conveyor, and each person stood in one place, doing one small task, over and over, as an endless river of cars flowed by. The effect was staggering. The time it took to build a single car collapsed from around 12 hours to about 90 minutes. And as the building got cheaper, so did the car, until its price fell low enough that an ordinary working family could finally afford one. Then Ford did one more thing that echoes to this day. He more than doubled his workers' pay to the famous $5 a day, partly so that the very people building the cars could afford to buy them. In a single stroke, he helped invent the modern idea of the mass consumer, the ordinary person with money to spend on the things they made. To keep the price low, he stripped away every luxury and every choice. and famously declared that a customer could have the car in any color he liked so long as it was black, because black paint dried the fastest and kept the line moving. It hardly mattered. The people did not want a fashionable car. They wanted a car at all, and they got it by the million, and then the tens of millions. Over its long life, this one plain, tough, affordable machine sold around 15 million copies and put not just a country, but a large part of the world onto wheels for the first time. Farmers who had never traveled beyond the next town could suddenly reach the city. The car was no longer a toy for the few. It was pouring off the lines by the millions into the hands of everyone. And now at last, it could begin its real work, tearing down the old world and building a new one shaped entirely around itself. Now, if you are enjoying this journey into how a single machine remade our entire world, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because this is exactly what we do here. Uncover the hidden forces that shaped the world you live in. And I would love to know, down in the comments, which country you are watching from and what the very first car in your family was. Because what happened next touched almost every one of those countries. Once ordinary people had cars, the first thing to shatter was the shape of the city itself. For thousands of years, a city could only grow as big as its people could move. Whether you walked or rode a horse, or later took a streetcar, there was a hard limit to how far you could live from your work, your market, and your friends, and still have a life. That limit held cities tight and dense, everyone packed close together because distance was the enemy. The car destroyed that limit overnight. Suddenly, a family could live miles from the city center, out where the land was cheap and open, and simply drive in each morning. And so a brand new kind of place was born, a place that had never truly existed before in human history, the suburb. After the great wars of the 20th century, this exploded on a scale hard to imagine. Developers bought up farmland on the edges of cities and covered it almost overnight with thousands upon thousands of near-identical houses, each with its own patch of grass, its own driveway, and, tellingly, its own garage, a room in the home built not for a person, but for a car. These new towns rose so fast they seemed to appear overnight, built to a handful of standard designs so that street after street of homes looked almost exactly alike. A whole landscape of matching roofs and identical lawns stretching to the horizon. For millions of families climbing out of cramped city apartments, it was a dream come true. Their own house, their own yard, their own square of the world, reachable only by the car parked out front. Millions streamed out of the crowded cities into this new landscape of lawns and cul-de-sacs. A whole way of life appeared. The commuter, who slept in one place and worked in another, and spent a slice of every single day sealed inside a metal box, moving between the two. And a new kind of person appeared too, one who would come to define the age, the teenager with a set of car keys. For young people, the automobile was something their parents had never known at that age, a private room on wheels, a way to escape the watchful eye of the family and drive off with friends, to a dance, to a diner, to a quiet road under the stars. The car handed the young a freedom no earlier generation had ever tasted, and an entire youth culture of music, dating, and rebellion grew up inside it, humming down the road with the radio on. The car had not just given people a way to travel. It had spread the human city out across the countryside like water spilled across a table, thin and wide, in a pattern we now simply call sprawl. And to hold that sprawl together, the world needed something new to drive on. What it built were the great highways, and they redrew whole nations. The most famous of them all rose in the United States, when in 1956 the government launched the construction of a vast network of interstate highways, tens of thousands of miles of wide, high-speed roads stitching the entire continent together. The idea had been burning in the mind of the president, who, as a young officer, had struggled to move an army convoy across his own country on miserable roads, and who had later seen the sweeping highways of Germany and understood what a nation wired for the automobile could become. These new roads were a marvel, and they changed the map of human settlement itself. Towns lucky enough to sit on the new highways boomed. Towns that were bypassed, left a few miles off the fast road, slowly withered and died, their main streets emptying as the traffic that once fed them roared past on the horizon. Entire regions that had been remote were suddenly a comfortable drive apart, and a new dream took hold in millions of hearts, one impossible in any earlier age: the road trip, the open highway, the whole country laid out before you, reachable through a windshield. The car had promised freedom, and here at last was the road to deliver it. But that endless ribbon of highway needed to be fed, and out along its edges, an entirely new world sprang up to serve the driver who never wanted to stop. Think about what a nation of drivers suddenly needed. They needed to eat without leaving the car, sleep along the road, and shop without ever walking far. And so one by one we invented the strange new places to give them exactly that. To feed them, we built the drive-in, and then the drive-through. Restaurants designed so that a meal could be handed straight through a car window to a person who never switched off the engine. The most famous fast food empires on Earth were born from precisely this. A small restaurant re-engineered around the automobile, built to serve a crowd that arrived on four wheels and wanted food fast, cheap, and without ever standing up. To let them sleep, we invented the motel, the motor hotel, a low building wrapped around a parking lot where a weary traveler could pull up right outside the door of their room and rest for the night before driving on at dawn. At the roadside diners and drive-ins, waitresses on roller skates, the famous car hops, glided out to parked cars and clipped trays of food right onto the window. Whole highways became legends in their own right, none more than the storied route that ran across the American heart, its name sung in songs and painted on signs, lined with neon-lit motels, diners, and gas stations, humming with the pure romance of the road. We even reinvented going to the movies for the car, building the drive-in cinema, a vast field where families and young couples parked in long rows to watch a giant screen through the windshield. The sound piped into the car. The automobile, now not just how you arrived, but the seat you watched from. None of these places, the drive-through, the motel, the roadside diner, had existed before the car. They are not old. They were conjured into being in a single lifetime, purely to serve a species that had decided it would rather not get out of its automobile. And the greatest of these new car temples was still to come, because we also had to reinvent shopping. In the old walking city, shops lined the main street downtown, where the crowd strolled past on foot. But the suburb had no downtown and no crowds on foot. It had drivers. So a new idea appeared. Gather all the shops together into one enormous building. Set it not in the old city center, but out among the highways, and surround it with a vast ocean of free parking. This was the shopping mall, and it swept across the landscape. Families would climb into the car, drive to this climate-controlled palace of stores, park in its endless lot, and spend the whole day inside, never touching the outside world. It was wildly successful, and it came at a price. As the malls rose out by the highways, the old downtown main streets, the beating hearts of towns for centuries, began to hollow out and die. Their shops shuttered, their sidewalks empty, because the life of the town had climbed into cars and driven to the edge. And to make room for all those cars, at the malls, the offices, the stores, we did something to the surface of the world so vast we barely notice it. We paved staggering portions of our cities flat and empty, purely as places to set a car down while its owner was elsewhere. In many modern cities, more land is given over to the parked car than to the human home. We had remade the very ground beneath our feet into a garage without walls. In the cities, the car did not empty, it carved apart. To pour all those suburban drivers into the old downtowns each morning, planners drove wide, roaring freeways straight through the middle of living cities. And to make room for them, whole neighborhoods were condemned and flattened, tens of thousands of homes torn down, communities that had stood for generations bulldozed into rubble and replaced with concrete and traffic. Often it was the poorest districts, the ones with the least power to fight back, that were split in two or wiped off the map entirely so that a commuter could shave a few minutes off the drive. In city after city, the car did not just spread outward into the fields. It reached back into the ancient heart of the city and rebuilt that too, in concrete and exhaust, tearing down the dense, walkable human places to make way for the machine. Some cities were remade so completely around the automobile that it became nearly impossible to live in them without one. Entire sprawling metropolises where the car was no longer a convenience, but a requirement for survival. But the car's reach ran deeper than concrete. It reached into the balance of power between nations because this new machine had a thirst, and what it drank was oil. As hundreds of millions of engines came to life across the planet, each one burning refined petroleum, oil was transformed from a minor curiosity into the single most important substance on Earth, the black blood of the modern world. Whoever controlled it held the modern age by the throat. For an army without fuel cannot move, and a nation without fuel grinds to a halt. And so the map of global power itself was quietly redrawn around the places where oil lay buried underground. Distant deserts that had mattered little to the great powers became the most fought-over ground on the planet. Fortunes and empires rose and fell on the price of a barrel. And when, in 1973, the flow of oil was suddenly choked off, the mighty industrial nations were brought to their knees within days. Their drivers waiting in mile-long lines at the pumps, their economies reeling, all because the machine they had built their entire world around had, for a moment, gone hungry. Nations built their foreign policy, stationed their fleets, and sent their armies to war over the guarantee of that flow, until the quiet hum of engines in a million driveways had become one of the great hidden engines of global conflict. A carriage that had once terrified a few German villages had grown into a force that could shake the whole world simply by getting thirsty. And there was a darker price still, one paid not in money, but in lives and in air. For all the freedom it gave, the car turned out to be one of the deadliest things human beings had ever built. As the roads filled, the crashes came, and over the decades the automobile killed people on a scale that rivaled wars. Tens of millions of lives lost to collisions across the century. A quiet, endless toll we came to accept as simply the cost of moving. In time we fought back against it, with the traffic light, the stop sign, the speed limit, and above all the seatbelt. When an engineer at a Swedish car maker designed the modern three-point belt, and his company chose to give the patent away to the whole world for free so that any manufacturer could use it and save lives. That single act of generosity has spared countless millions since. But the car's deepest wound was to the very air. The exhaust of all those engines wrapped great cities in choking brown smog, poisoned the air with lead for decades, and poured out an invisible river of carbon that would come, in time, to alter the climate of the entire planet. The machine that rebuilt the world was also slowly changing its skies, and that shadow hangs over the story still, as the world now races to reinvent the car all over again to keep its freedom without its poison. So step back now and look at the whole shape of what one machine has done. It began as a frightening toy that made villagers cross themselves and horses bolt. And within a single century, it had reached into nearly every corner of human life and rearranged it. It pulled the city apart and flung it across the countryside as suburb and sprawl. It laid tens of thousands of miles of highway over mountains and plains. It invented the shopping mall, the drive-through, the motel, and the parking lot, whole categories of place that had never existed before. It made oil the master resource of the age and rewrote the balance of power between nations. It reshaped where we live, where we work, where we shop, how far apart the pieces of our lives are allowed to be, and even the air that we breathe. No invention in all of human history has so completely redrawn the physical surface of the planet. We did not simply build the car. We rebuilt the world to hold it. And here is the thought I want to leave you with. Every time you walk out your door and see that strip of asphalt, that painted line, that field of parking, you are not looking at the natural world. You are standing inside a landscape designed from the ground up for a machine, and you have lived in it so long that it looks to you like nothing at all. Even now, as silent electric motors and self-driving cars begin to arrive, they are not building a new world. They are moving into the one the car already made. So tell me, down in the comments, which country are you watching from? And what was the very first car your family ever owned? And if you had to choose, would you rather live in a world with the automobile, with all it gave and all it took, or in the quiet, close-knit, walking world it swept away forever? Share this with someone who loves history and subscribe, because next time we uncover the story of another invention that quietly rebuilt the world you live in. It is all around you. You just have to learn to see it.